Hello, welcome to the Go Tiny California campaign. Hi, I'm Lindsay Wood, the Tiny Home Lady, and I will be your guide throughout today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's get going. Okay, so Go Tiny California, Housing California, one home at a time is our focus here today. And let's get things started right off. Thank you so much for the Tiny Home Industry Association and the American Tiny House Association. As I shared, I'm the Tiny Home Lady. So this is a collaboration of these three organizations. What we're going to cover today, the story of housing. How did we get here? The California housing opportunities present in our state of California, both the accessory dwelling unit ordinance as well as the junior ADU. And also, what are the zoning and building standards? These are really important things to understand as we think about adding something to our property, especially with wheels. Requirements for movable tiny homes or tiny homes on wheels, the City of Fresno and San Luis Obispo ordinance. So this webinar is specific to the City of Fresno and San Luis Obispo. And we have other webinars. If your city's in a different area, we have a whole list of all of those back where you found this information about this one. Mostly we're going to be on the page and the Facebook group of the American Tiny House Association. How to finance a tiny home. And then finally, the Go Tiny California Resource Guide. All right, let's get going. So first of all, my quick story, my husband and I were living in Marin County. It was very expensive to live there. We decided we really wanted to be homeowners, but we also wanted to travel the country. So a tiny home was perfect for us. This is our 32-foot tiny home, and we love this tiny home. It's been so great for us. I've had it for about 5 years. And as of this recording, we've just sold it so we can move on to our next chapter. And really love connecting with the hundreds and hundreds of people that I've communicated with about identifying how they could make it happen for them, whether it's on wheels or on foundation. And we also want a big shout out to Jay Schaefer, godfather of tiny homes. Without this gentleman, none of us would be here talking about tiny homes. So how did this housing situation begin in terms of the crisis, the lack of affordable housing? It really starts with this graph. Back in 1945, we see this goes up and down, and these are called housing starts. When they get a permit for a new home, that's what it's called, a housing start. So it's, as you can see, it goes up and down, up and down. But we really fell off the cliff around 2005 with housing building going much less than 1945 numbers. And yet this graph and the next graph are telltale signs of the problem. So while this was going up and down, the US population did not go up and down, right? About 1945 is when we come into the previous graph, and it just goes up and up and up and up. And so we have a, up and down situation of homes being built. US population only growing leads us to our next problem. In the 60s, the wages that you made and the housing prices, that was only 2 to 3 times. And it really depends on where you live around the country. Fast forward to 2016, and now we're in 2024 at the time of this recording, the gap has grown. And in some areas, the gap could be more like 7 or 8 times our housing prices. So this is where families across the country are feeling the pinch, especially here in California. If you live in the Bay Area versus City of Fresno or San Luis Obispo. In fact, just these two cities alone, San Luis Obispo is going to be more on the coast, Fresno is going to be inland. So you're going to see a wage gap being different or higher on, is it like 3, 4, 5 times? It really depends on your location. Location. So the reality, California must build 2.5 million homes to avoid an even worse housing crisis by 2030. That's a lot of homes. I can tell you right now, our entire industry across the country of just tiny home on wheels could not meet that number alone. So we've got a mixture of opportunities, and yet we're talking about movable tiny homes and tiny homes on wheels. But I do want to share with you where all of this opportunity stems from. And that's really opportunities present here in California. And for anyone that wants to actually, take a look at their own state, and it may not be California, we'll talk about that in a moment. So its official goal is 180,000 units a year. That's only 1.3 million by 2030. And that just sort of is keeping us alive, right? Being able to meet at least a immediate demand. But as you can see, the numbers of 2.5 million don't go away just because we're trying to go after 180,000 units. So simple bottom line, we need more homes. Now, in the state of California, the housing laws, this is specific to this state, but California has been, having a housing crisis for many years. Maybe other states around the country may not have experienced a housing crisis only in the last few years, but California has been having them for more than a decade. So what is available to people in California? The accessory dwelling unit, also known as ADU, is an acronym. That means you add an ADU of anywhere from 800 to 1,200 square feet on your property. Really depends on jurisdiction. A junior ADU is another opportunity, and that would be attached. So whether you transform a garage, a master bedroom, an attic, maybe basement, if those even exist here in the state, this gives you an opportunity to add a livable unit. Now, under these two, the ADU and the junior, most likely the ADU, a movable tiny home or tiny home on wheels can be added as an accessory dwelling unit. I did put down here SB9. It's a bit under attack, so I'm just going to sort of mention that. That would be something that you'd want to go and take a look at. That would be where you transform an R1 zone lot from one home into four. But because it's under attack in different jurisdictions, it's a bit questionable as to whether or not it will have any strong footing for going forward. So we're going to focus on the ADU and the junior ADU and the movable tiny home. So the ADU and junior, these are just a variety of different things that you can do. So classic ADU, which is the legal term for secondary home. Sometimes people say, what is the difference of a tiny home and an ADU? That's like talking about building standard and zoning laws, apples and oranges. They're literally not even on the same page. So when we're talking about an ADU or a junior would be attached. That's that existing garage or master bedroom or above garage conversion, lower level, interior. Think of it as an attached wall or floor, maybe ceiling. We didn't really talk about basements here in California. But detached ADU is really going to be largely what the tiny home on wheel or movable tiny home would be known as, because it's on wheels. Somehow it's going to be built in a factory, arrive on wheels. Even if it's built, it's going to be built to a trailer. So it's not going to carry an existing wall. So that really tells us that we are going to be focusing on the ADU in regards to a movable or a tiny home on wheels. So there's this junior ADU, it's maximum 500 square feet. So that's a little bit different than the ADU of 800 to 1,200. And again, it's attached, either attic, garage, master bedroom. Oh, and another key thing, homeowner must live on the property. Now there's something very specific to tiny home ordinances that we're going to find out in Fresno and San Luis Obispo, where this whole thing, where the homeowner must live on the property, it's going to be very specific to the jurisdiction as to whether or not the homeowner has to live on the property. But the ADU, typically around the state, an investor can own a property and the ADU can be there and they don't have to live on the property. When it comes to a junior, they have to live on the property. Okay, so ADU of many names: backyard cottage, in-law, mother-in-law, guest house, laneway, casita, you name it. In fact, there's the Casita Coalition that focuses on these small units. In this case, we're focusing on a unit that is actually being delivered. And notice there is no wheels. This is what we call a modular. It's built in a factory, arrive on wheels, and placed on foundation. And we're going to go into more building standards in a moment. And, for sure, the opportunities to put something down the side of a home where you only have 5 foot from this home and 5 foot from that, giving you 10 feet, and that's eave to eave. Most likely the eaves are going to stick out over those 5 feet, only allowing you more like 2 or 3 feet, doesn't give an opportunity to put something and drive it down the middle of two homes. So likely we're going to be craning these homes in, whether they're on wheels or whether they're built to a modular building standard. What is required for a detached ADU? Needs to be 5 feet from property line. Oftentimes I heard of 4 feet, but when it comes to fire rating and fire safety, 5 feet from the property line. You can get an opportunity to have it on the lot line, but you're going to absolutely want to make sure that your finishing of your wall is going to have a 1 hour fire rating. And not all products have that. It might be a standing seam roof that could actually come down on the side. That would be a 1 hour fire rating. This wood paneling right here would definitely not be a fire rating. So notice from the fence to where this home is set back 5 feet. So that's a really good opportunity. I've only had one project where they're like, you know what, we'll be willing to pay for it. We want the space. And right next to their property happens to be a commercial lot. But the other one is that it's 10 feet from the primary home. That does not include the eaves, because if we go from this primary home here to the ADU, that can be 10 feet. But notice the deck sticks out, the stairs, the awning, all those things are much closer. The other thing is that it's on an approved foundation. We're going to be going into some of the ordinances here specific to San Luis Obispo and Fresno, where it is requiring you, one of the cities, to have it on a concrete foundation. That's not the case in every city. It's really going to be specific to your jurisdiction. Plus, hooked up to utilities, water, sewer or septic, and electricity. And that is not going to be in the air. It's going to be in the ground. So wherever your water facility, let's say the spigot's right here, and now they're going to go underground to connect the primary to the ADU for the water, from the electricity panel, from the clean out of the sewer, all those things are going to be attached. And the job of whoever's going to be inspecting that property to really let you know how much things are going to cost to develop it, we'll be looking at measurements from those connection utilities over to the ADU. Zoning. What is allowed or not allowed on the land or property is everything to do with zoning. I kind of look at it like this. This is the land. This is the build, right? Your building is going to be all about your building standard, and then your property or your land is going to be your land. Let's take a look at a video to explain more about zoning.
What is zoning? Zoning is the way a community controls the physical development of land and the use of property. Every property in the city has a legal zoning designation that determines how a property can be utilized. Zoning was originally created as a tool to protect the health and safety of a community by separating incompatible land uses. Today, zoning still serves this purpose, but it's also used to help protect neighborhood character and property values, create new and unique places in the city, and implement many of the land use and design goals of the general plan. So why is zoning important? Knowing a property's zoning is critical to understanding what is legally allowed to occur on the property and where and to what extent buildings can be constructed. If you are thinking about buying a home or starting a business, choosing a property that has the zoning that meets your needs is a vital first step. What exactly does zoning do? Zoning regulates many aspects of a property. The first and most notable aspect zoning regulates is land use. Zoning codes are typically organized into several sections based on groupings of land use categories, from single-family residential to industrial. For the most part, zoning categories are intended to only allow for one type of land use. For example, Zoning categories for single-family residential only allow you to live in the house, but do not permit any business activity to occur. Let's highlight some other key aspects of zoning besides land use regulation. Building height. Zoning regulates how tall buildings or structures can be on a property. Setbacks. Every zoning district sets parameters for minimum or maximum distances a building can be from a property line. Lot coverage. Many zoning districts also regulate how much of a property can be covered by the building. Density. Zoning sets limits on how many dwelling units or homes can be placed on a property. For example, if your property is zoned single-family residential, it can only have one primary structure on it for living purposes. Thank you so much for watching. Want to learn more about zoning? Please.
So that helps us understand a little bit more about the zoning scenarios, as that is where I found to be the most, excuse me. Let's go on to the next page. Somehow that doesn't come back easy. So when people ask me a lot about about their property and what's allowed and how can I get a tiny home on it, my mind starts going into what is the zoning of the land? That's like the law of the land. The building standard has to everything to do with how the home is built. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the building standard only. It has nothing to do with the land. So when we say, is an ADU a tiny home? Well, ADU is for zoning, and a tiny home is all about how the home is built and what building standard was building to. Now, with the importance of this, these two have to talk, right? If your zoning requires a certain building standard, then if you have a building standard that's built and this zoning does not allow for that, that's where we get into problems. So let's talk about building standards. Now, before I get diving in, the word tiny home or tiny house is a marketing term. There is no tiny house permit in your jurisdiction. There might be a tiny home on wheels, a movable tiny home permit, or a ADU permit, all those kind of things, but the traditional just tiny home, because you could say a tiny home related to a van, a school bus, you name it, a small home, a large home. Okay, so now we'll talk about building standards. Every type you're going to see next is built in a factory, arrives on wheels, and is placed on the property. Whether it stays on the wheels or comes off the wheels is very specific to the building standard for which it was built. Movable tiny home. Notice, it's a 0, not even a standard yet. There is a task force working on this. We're likely, it's 2024 now, we're likely to see something come of reality in about maybe 2 to 3 years for a specific building standard. Notice, all the building standards I'm going to talk about next have been around for decades upon decades. Most of them have been around before I was even born in 1970. So to come out with a brand new standard is a big deal, but our industry needs it, and our changing housing demographics need it. So typically, a movable tiny home or tiny home on wheels is built to these two type of building standards: the recreational vehicle standard and FPA 1192. Notice here, manufacturer certifies compliance with standard for recreational vehicles and FPA 1192. Oftentimes, the RV Industry Association or Gold Seal is what comes on these fifth wheels, trailers, pop-up campers, bumper pushers. These could be multi-million-dollar homes. These could be a few $1,000s. But notice the underlying word here, temporary living. You can park one on your property all day long, but it's not known for permanent living or dwelling. It's only known for temporary dwelling. Can you put one of these in an RV park and live in it full time? Sure, because the RV park has been designated allowable to live in these tiny homes, or sorry, these RVs, right? See, notice how I'm using these different words interchangeably. We can get kind of confused. Tiny home, RV. Our tiny home industry is building our tiny homes to the RV standards because we didn't have our own standard. And the best ones that existed look traditionally like our tiny homes, but kind of nothing like it. Only that they're on wheels, those pesky little wheels. Okay, so the next one is the Park Model RV, also known as ANSI A119.5. And notice how I blew out this little area. This is a Pacific West Associates Incorporated sticker. And it says this recreational vehicle manufacturer certifies compliance to the ANSI A119.5 standards of recreational vehicles. The manufacturer also complies to the current applicable NFPA number 70 National Electrical Codes. So this is the third-party certifier. They are proving that the home that you're seeing was built to this standard. So whether or not it was the RVIA or Pacific West or another couple certifiers that are out there, it's all about the building standard that it was built to. So here for this factor and this ANSI, they can be built up to 400 square feet. That's where we start seeing more of the tiny homes, right? 10 wide, 30 long, maybe 8.5 wide, 40 long. This gives us up to 400 square feet, and that's only the ground floor. Any loft does not contribute to the full 400 square foot. So you could have a tiny home that's 450 square feet or 500 square feet because you're adding in more lofts. That loft space does not attribute to the actual minimum square feet of 400 or maximum, sorry, of 400 square feet. But notice there's that pesky thing, temporary living, right? It's known for temporary living. Now, there's lots of park models all over the country where people are living in park models year round. But those parks are allowed, they're zoned for that type of living or that kind of building standard. Third one, International Residential Code, IRC. So for example, this Zip Kit home was built in a factory and arrived on wheels and is now placed on foundation. It's known also as the California Building Code, modular, prefab, and factory built. My apologies, there's so many terminologies for this, but essentially it's built to the IRC or known as the California Building Code. Built in a factory, arrive on wheels, placed on foundation. This is largely what a lot of people, when they say, I'd like to go tiny or add an ADU in my backyard, they're thinking of something that's really not movable. If you can answer the question of, do you want to move it or not? And your answer is to no, you're going to go with a modular. The other question is, where is this allowed? Now, for today's webinar, we're focusing already on the city of Fresno and San Luis Obispo, where movable tiny homes or tiny home on wheels already are allowed in the backyard as an ADU, not as a primary and not as a junior, okay? They're allowed in the backyard as an ADU. But let's say you wanted to buy raw land and put something on there, then you would buy a modular built in a factory and placed as a primary. And then your movable tiny home could be your ADU. So there's lots of variations, but in the city of Fresno and San Luis Obispo, the movable home is only known for the ADU part of the property. So most likely you're going to want to start with property that already has a primary, and you would add the movable or tiny home on wheel as the ADU. So the fourth one is housing urban development, also known as HUD. We're pretty much familiar with anything that's known as a mobile home. In 1976, it became manufactured home. That also means housing urban development. This is known to be allowed across the country and also allowed in backyards as an ADU. Built in a factory, arrive on wheels, placed on permanent foundation. Now, a little fun fact, that can also keep the wheels on there. It doesn't have to. They put this up on metal adjustable piers. And they're known to be coming in two different sections. In this case, with this width of the home, there's a split right down the middle. We used to call this the double wide modular or mobile. Sorry, not modular, mobile home. And so with the kind of new trends, this is actually what we used to call a double wide. Very modern, but it is split in two. Now, if this was built to a modular standard, you wouldn't know the difference. Only the fact that the building standard for which it was built is either going to be HUD or modular. So good news is there's only 4 currently. We're working on a 5th. But the HUD code is actually 320 square feet or more. So notice we have a little bit of an overlap. Here in the park model, it was maximum 400 square feet. Whereas in the HUD, it starts at 320 square feet and goes up. So there's a little bit of between 320 and 400 square feet. Now, are there some builders that are building to both the RV standard, the modular, and the HUD? Not yet. Most of the companies out there are going to build to the NFPA and ANSI, and one of the other two, either the modular or the HUD, so that they can tap into the people that wouldn't otherwise be allowed to get an RV or built to NFPA or ANSI in a backyard, but they would allow a modular or a HUD unit. And the difference of a HUD unit versus modular, it's a national standard, whereas modular or IRC is built to a state building code. So let me review. We've got the movable tiny home. That is not a standard yet. The NFPA RV is a standard that is known as an RV. And number 2 is an ANSI RV park model. Number 3 is IRC or state building code, modular, prefab, factory built. And number 4 is HUD, national standard. A little bit about the craning again. Most likely, if you're going to have a property where you can't drive a home into, it's going to have to get craned up and over. I've heard of somewhere between anywhere from $7,000 to $15,000 to $20,000, depending on the complexity. It's all about, are there any utility lines? Most likely, if there's utility lines, it's going to be a difficult project because cranes are less likely to go over something like that. If there's trees in the way, if it's a 2-story, if you're going to have to go up and far back in, like 100 feet, those are all things that contribute to the price of a crane. But it may be very much an opportunity to, still put the home in there because it's built in the factory at prices that could be reasonable versus having it built on site. So another thing about foundation systems, you're going to go from just the concrete slab to metal adjustable piers, helical piers, or even maybe a true grid or a gravel pad. There's lots of different foundation systems. You really have to check with your jurisdiction to see what's allowed and whether or not your builder that you're getting your home built by is able to provide you with these turnkey services, the utilities, the foundation systems. Clearly, they're going to be able to provide you with a delivery either by a professional company or themselves. Most likely it's going to be professional. But the question is, are they going to do the foundation and are they going to do the utilities? Either they're going to give you a quote for the build and the development, or maybe one quote for all, or they only give you a quote for the build and delivery, and then you have to do the rest of the installation. Most likely with my tiny home builders out there, they're only going to be doing the build and the transportation. For the modular companies and the manufactured home, they're going to do all of it. Because if you work with a manufactured home company, they actually have certified contractors to install that home. Same with modular. A modular will require a general contractor to install that home. You cannot GC your own modular installation. So, will there be obstacles? Probably. But your dream home may have challenges to overcome. And who are the people you need to put on your team to make this happen, right? What will my jurisdiction allow for a foundation? That's a really big question. We've just reviewed 4 different types. How much will the development cost? A lot of times people focus, and it's so easy to figure out how much the tiny home will cost, or the modular, or the HUD unit. But how much will the development? How far away is my water line? How far away is my sewer connection? What about my electrical panel? Will I need to upgrade it from a 50 amp to a 100 amp, or from a 100 amp to a 200 amp? All of those things need to be figured out. And it might be that you, the property owner, have to go find your team to figure out the development part, especially if you're working with a builder that doesn't do the development turnkey. So this is a really good opportunity. I've been fielding a lot of questions that we've been talking about the Go Tiny California campaign. For some people, I've just heard from people in New Jersey, from Washington, you name it. And what I want to focus on is the fact that these are all the cities and counties that have already approved and legalized something to do with a movable tiny home or a tiny home on wheels, meaning they've literally gone through agendas and voting and making up different ordinances to get approved. And so we wanted to feature these cities and counties so that communities like the city of Fresno and the city of San Luis Obispo and the homeowners inside these cities and counties can really make a choice as to which direction they want to go. Because I believe it's all about options. And we want to make sure there's options. If you are in a city or a county or a state that is not listed on this list, obviously, we're only focused on California right now. But if you're in an area where you don't think there's much opportunity for a movable tiny home, the Tiny Home Industry Association is your first place to go. So we're going to go and link here to the website. It's only $25 for an individual member to join. And so we're going to take ourselves to the website. Noticed here resources. So there is a resource map. We click here on the resource map. This website takes a little long to load, so don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just slow. And so on this map, you can see everywhere there's green, there's probably a builder or a piece of legislation or a community that exists. If you live in a state that there's nothing available, then the Tiny Home Industry Association is a great place to start. So let's take, for example, Illinois. We're going to click on the map. We're going to look at, see if there's legislation available. There's nothing that we've listed. It doesn't mean, this thing takes a lot of time and energy to make sure and maintain, but most likely there's going to be a builder listed, right? There we go, Hawk Tiny Homes. Now, if you were living in Indiana and you didn't know if there's any other opportunity, I would probably call Illinois. I would call the builder that's listed there. Let's see if there's any community in Illinois. I don't think so. I didn't think so. Okay, so now let's go to the state of California because I know there's a lot more listed there. But do know that this map isn't 100%, updated. So that's why we're working on the resource guide. So we're going to click here on builders. And here's a list of the builders. Some of the builders on this list are actually out of business, Wilderwise, and let's see, another one, Back Porch Homes. They're no longer in business. Okay. So how are you to know? That's an important part about these lists are great, but we got to keep them up. Okay. And that's why we're creating the Tiny House Resource Guide for a fee, because when you pay a fee, then things are oftentimes updated. So let's click on legislation. And this is where we get to see a lot of the legislation that has been passed. There might even be some. I know the most recent one was San Benito County. So you can click here, and we're not going to go do that right now because we're going to focus on Fresno and the city of San Luis Obispo, which happen to be some of the earliest cities to make this happen. Now, let's say you live in a state that's you're not, there's nothing listed for you. And so you're going to join THEA for $25. And then what you're going to get access to is pretty amazing. I'm going to actually go up into my as if I was a member and do a login. Oops, you know what? I just realized I might be expired. I just realized that. So let's see if yep, there you go. I'm expired, but I think I have another, probably should have upgraded before I did this, right? Okay, so I think I'm signed on as another builder. There we go. Okay, so let's do this. Join now. Oopsie. Okay. Okay, so I just had to take a moment and renew my membership. So once you're up, you go up to the little person right up there, click down to THRIA Resource Library, and this will help you get the skills and the training needed to connect with your jurisdiction on educating them about the tiny homes or movable tiny homes. So we scroll down, advocacy training. There's a whole webinar series that has been created about 4 years ago that's still, the information inside there is still applicable, right? There's part 1, 2, and 3. It's all about how to legalize in your area, 1, 2, and 3. So there's one. And then the other one that you want to take a look at if you're looking to develop property and work with a bigger project, there is community development. That $25 that you spend is going to be paid for instantly because the gentleman, Dan Fitzpatrick, who's actually the president of the Tiny Home Industry Association, the author of all the ordinances, in fact, the city of Fresno that got the first ordinance to pass in the state of California, he's the one that wrote all of those. He's the one that's teaching these courses. So it's really great. It talks about, case studies, how to buy land without buying land, and doing your due diligence. We also have Terry Lantrip, who's another developer that's actually using his case study in there. So this is a wealth of knowledge. I could not impress it more to spend the $25 to get access to these case studies. You will not get access to it here on these educational tools, only if you're a member by clicking and then joining, and then the THIA resource library will be available. All right, so back to our presentation. Thank you, Thea. Now, once Thea has done their thing, this is where Atha and myself come into play, where we want to promote that these cities have gone ahead and done this. So if you're living in the city of Fresno and you're interested in putting something in your backyard that you would like to either be an ADU or a junior ADU or movable tiny home, this is how we get there. So we go to the website, City of Fresno. And because I've done this a lot, the best way is to go in and type in tiny homes, exactly like that, tiny homes. If you type in tiny house, tiny home on wheels, don't do it. I've done it all. Tiny homes. Then you click on application forms and fees. Then we go down to the application submittal completeness checklist. I know they really buried it. Then we go down to the tiny homes handout with submittal requirements checklist. Whew, right? So the good news is this is a recording. You can always go back in, and we're also going to have the instructions on how to get there in the resource guide. So can I have a tiny home on my property? Here are some key parts of the ordinance that it got approved. Now, again, state of California has the ADU statewide. So if you have a property in the state of California and you don't already have an accessory, a dwelling unit in the backyard, you're allowed to have one. Now, areas like historic and coastal commission, you're going to have more rules. Historic, they may tell you how it's going to look, right? It needs to match your front home. Coastal Commission, I don't even begin to know. I just know there's going to be more forms to fill out if you're in the Coastal Commission. So those are people that are on the coastline. City of San Diego, coastal areas like the city of Fort Bragg, city of San Luis Obispo. Okay. But the good news is many things start with the land and development planning department. So really key part in the Fresno area that it's licensed and registered with the DMV and it meets ANSI requirements. Okay. Notice that doesn't say NFPA here, right? So you want to make sure you're working with your builder and they're going to be meeting the ANSI requirements. let's see, it's towable by a bumper hitch, frame, or fifth wheel connection. It is not designed to move under its own power. So any, like motor home or motor coach, we call it bumper pull, that is not allowed, right? It can't move under its own power. And then when it's sighted, it needs to be skirted, right? Those wheels have to be covered. It's no larger than the California state law for movement on public highways, which I think is somewhere in that 14 14 feet wide. Most likely, many builders will build 10 wide. And it has at least 100 square feet of first floor living space. I don't think I've seen many that are under that. That used to be the old days. Thank you, Jay Schaefer. And then it's a detached self-contained unit, which includes basic functional areas that support normal daily routines, cooking, sleeping, toiletry. Okay. So if you have a unit that doesn't have a kitchen and it doesn't have a bathroom, that is known as a shelter. A lot of people kind of mistakenly say a tiny home for those that are unhoused. Those are shelters, right? Where the bathroom is separate and the kitchen facilities are separate. And it's designed to look like a conventional building structure. Then we get into more of like requirements in terms of what the lot will be. Remember, everything up here had to do with the building standard. Everything down here has to do with the zoning laws, minimum lot size, right? No parking additional required on these things. Okay, so then additional specifications related to tiny homes and backyard cottages, that it must conform to the height and setbacks, right, of the zoning district. It must be a minimum of 6 feet from the primary or 10 feet if there's an entry from either one of the units into the space between. So 6 or 10, I usually kind of go with the minimum size square foot of 10, but if your property really is tight and it can only be 6, then that could really be helpful. Maximum building height of 30 feet. Usually it's going to be, 60 or the minimum, the height of a tiny home for allowable on roads is 13.5 or 13.6. I've seen both. And so you can come on and read here all this information. Really important one, mechanical equipment shall be located on the ground or in case of a tiny house on wheels incorporated into the structure, but nowhere on the roof. And that basically delineates all the RVs, fifth wheels, trailers that usually have ACs on the roof. Okay, so other requirements, this is very specific. Fresno is going to require a concrete pad is required in the location where the tiny home will be parked. So most likely you're not going to get away with the grading of, gravel or other things. So if you really do want other things, you're going to have to work with your local jurisdiction. It must be connected to sewer and water, and utility permits are required for these connections. And then this is the very key one, as I mentioned, owner must occupy at least one of the two units, the primary or the ADU, or in this case, the tiny home. Right? That's a very key thing, because not ADU laws don't require owners to occupy. So whether that's changed or not, you want to work with your jurisdiction. And then official documentation from Pacific West Associates or a national organization of alternative housing or similar agency verifying the ANSI standards have been met. So they're actually naming Pac West in that. So if you go get a build from someone that builds to an RV standard or from RVIA, you've got to make sure that the city of Fresno will allow that, right? These are all things that come into play. Then we get into planning review fees and so on. The good news is you've kind of gotten a little checklist of all the things that you really want to go back to your builder and make sure they're meeting. If your builder doesn't meet one of these things, then you have to go back to the jurisdiction and make sure that that's okay. Or you want to work with a builder that does it turnkey, and they've probably placed these homes there in Fresno before. That's another key one. If they haven't done one before, then you both are starting out brand new. All right, so that is from Fresno. Now let's go back to the webinar. Whoops, excuse me. I've already gone to the city of Fresno, going back to the webinar. We want to move forward. Okay, let's escape. It doesn't like that because I've got a link there. Okay. And now we'll go to the city of San Luis Obispo. think I need to do a link in the future. So beautiful city of San Francisco. Now we're going to the coast, right? We've taken a journey from Fresno inland, now over to city of San Luis Obispo. Here we are on the website. Now, once again, what we want to do is type in tiny house on wheels. You can say all kinds of things. You can go and start clicking government departments and all that. I don't recommend it. You're going to be down the rabbit hole. Then you're going to click on this link, tiny home on wheels. Notice under planning and zoning, then planning and permits, then tiny home on wheels. So it's quite a rabbit holes. But if you just type in tiny home on wheels, you will get to the page. So let me enlarge this a little bit. So this is where we get into something very similar in terms of an application checklist, right? There's the checklist right there, DMV registration. It's going to talk about, different copies. Let's go back to the website. Planning application, you're going to be filling this out. And then something that's very interesting is note the following requirements. This is an RV, recreational vehicles used as dwellings. Remember, they're usually RVs are used for temporary living. So this is used as a dwelling parked on a private lot. So there's a number of things here. You're going to talk about renewal, size, design, parking spaces, foundation requirements. Let's see if we talk about leveling. So this one, leveling support jacks shall sit on a concrete, paved, or compacted gravel. So see, the city of San Luis Obispo was different than Fresno. Now, if you still want to do a gravel pad in Fresno, go and talk to your jurisdiction. They might have changed rules, right? These were all passed many years ago. So what's written in code might have shifted, or there may be a variance that they're going to allow you to do. But in this case, City of San Luis Obispo is allowing it to be on a gravel. So there's all kinds of things that you're going to need to meet. And these are the documents that you're going to want to go through to figure out what's going to work for you. Let's see if I can go forward. There we go. Use the arrow button. Okay. So how to finance a tiny home? Well, we're going to focus on just the RV for a moment, right? There's your RV, and that is known as personal property. If you're going to get real property, the IRC and HUD, that is known as real property. It's a fixed to land, even if both of these got built in a factory, right? This one arrives on wheels and stays on wheels. This one arrives on wheels, lands on foundation. That foundation might be set up on piers, right? Imagine if you have a slope to land, definitely set on piers, but it's affixed to the property. In some cases, they may require, your financing may require that is affixed. Your permit will definitely require that it's affixed in some way. Okay, so a tiny home financing options really comes down to a secured consumer loan, which in this moment is only 21st for Mortgage Corporation, or unsecured consumer loan. Lightstream, Hearth, Lending Tree, your local credit union, all of these type of options is that it's unsecured. All it's going to do is attach to your personal credit profile. With secured consumer loan, it will not only attach to your credit profile, but also to the actual home itself. So let's dive in a little bit. The pros and cons of a secured loan. The pros are that's going to be some kind of collateral. Terms 25 years with 21st. Better interest rate. Now, they're still not as good as your IRC or, your regular Fannie Mae, Fannie Mac, which are going to go more with the, the HUD loans or anything built to a modular building standard. However, there are better interest rates than, unfortunately, with unsecured loans. But you do need to work with reputable builders and dealers, because if you're going to be working with 21st, they're going to require a builder has at least 2 years of business and that they are third-party certified. The cons is there's a down payment. You must be working with a builder or dealer that is allowed to provide the 21st mortgage. And then there's more requirements, tax returns, work history, more paperwork to get this type of secured loan. But upon getting it, that's a great opportunity. The other one is that if you are above your income, and in terms of what number you're wanting, let's say you make $80,000 a year and you need a $150,000 home, you're going to need to find a co-borrower. Okay, unsecured loans, the pros and cons of that. Pros, no down payment, no appraisal, no certifications. There's a preliminary soft credit check. The cons, shorter terms, higher interest rates. The loan amount has to be lesser income, or same thing, you'll need a co-borrower. I guess that's not really a con. That's going to be whether or not you're going to get unsecured or secured. It really comes down to the credit limit that you have available. Okay, so now we're wrapping up. I just want to say thank you so much for joining. We do have a resource guide that is in the works, and this is the link here. And as soon as we announce that it's going to be available, it will be on our, the YouTube link will be live, but it will be at the tinyhomelady.com/AFA Go Tiny California. And that is the QR code to get to this resource guide. We're going to have builders in there, permit providers, third-party certifiers, all the ordinances as we build these webinars so that you have the right resources for you to make your tiny home dreams come true. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great day.